Grant, are you okay? Grab a seat. Yep. Kia ora, good morning. Konnichiwa. Now I'd like to open the Strategy and Finance Committee meeting of the 15th of November and call on our Deputy Mayor to open with karakia. How can I get it? Shift.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, o tira, tēnā tātou katoa. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, thank you. Just before we move into business, I just need to give some housekeeping. Explain this meeting has been recorded and will be live streamed to our council YouTube page. Health and safety requirements for the council chambers are shown with fire and emergency and health and safety. The meeting places in Te Marae o Hine the square in the unlikely event of an emergency. Non-smoking is the policy in the building, and there's a defibrillator on the ground floor. Online participants, if you could keep your cameras turned on, and councillors in person, no trouble there, and they are the basic notes. Can I just say that we have scheduled in the order paper the Waterloo Park land exchange for after morning break. There may be some other members of the public coming, so if we're moving through the financial reports earlier, we'll just take another item and leave that for after the break in respect of those members of the public. I'll move to apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Lou Finlay, Councillor Rachel Bowen, and Councillor Lorna Johnson for lateness. Are there any others? I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Naylor. We just had a note that Councillor Bowen is not a member of the committee, so it's been noted in the motion. But now I'd like to invite a vote. Okay. I thank you. That's passed 12 votes for and none against. Notification of additional items. I haven't been aware of any. There is none. Oh yeah, that's right. But as far as items on the agenda, with the concurrence of the Mayor, item 22, the deliberations of submissions with the draft interim speed management plan for the school speed limits has been deferred to the council meeting on 18th of December due to illness. And that was the presenting officer is unwell. Sorry about that.
A declaration of conflict of interest.
I'll be moving into that now.
Thank you.
Item 4, declaration of interest.
With regards to, Mr. Chair, with regards to item 17, I have a conflict of interest as I'm the patron of the Whaturaranga Rōpū. Thank you.
Thank you to our Deputy Mayor. Are there any conflicts of interest from others? Councillor Meehan.
Declare an interest in item 16.
Okay. Noted. Item 5 is public comment. I'm not made aware of any wishing to speak. Can I please acknowledge there were requests both supporting and opposing views for the Waterloo Park submissions, but as we had a formal hearing with that item already, I declined each of those as far as due fair process. Just noting that. Confirmation of the minutes, which are on page 9, I'm happy to move. Seconded by the Deputy Chair, Councillor Naylor. Is there any items or matters arising from those minutes? None. I'd like to invite a vote. I'll move as on the screen already, so invite a vote. That's passed, 12 votes for and 1 abstention. Moves us on to 7, which is quarterly performance and financial report. Invite Scott Manser, Financial Manager, and Andrew Boyle, Head of Community Planning, to the table to present.
Good morning, elected members. Very privileged to bring the first quarter financial report to you this morning. I'll take the papers largely as read, but just talk to a few key points. So we're very close to budget at the end of the first quarter. In fact, less than 100,000 unfavourable for our controllable surplus deficit at the end of the first quarter. Just to note, with the change in financial systems and reporting systems, Finance has done a high-level phasing of the budget. We haven't had feed-in from the rest of the divisional managers around the organisation. So just highlighting that the phasing of the budget may change for the second quarter report as we get that information from the divisional managers. It's not expected to change results. It's just a note that some things may move very slightly. You'll also see in the report that we mention with the new systems, there's some new processes that has meant that we've done a few more estimates for the first quarter than we normally would have. And in fact, those are already looking to be rectified through October and into November. So just a note that there are some estimates in this report and they could be a little bit out. However, that will expect to correct itself through the second quarter. I'd also just like to highlight the dashboard on page 73. So I think we surfaced that at the end of last financial year, and we're intending on using dashboards more for the monthly updates to elected members and have the bulk of the reporting through the quarter report. So we'll continue to work and improve that dashboard, but that's the first cut so far. With regards to capital, very pleasing to have a continuation of the momentum at the end of last financial year. We've spent 16.7 million for the first quarter, which is well more than the previous first quarter last year, which was only 9 million. So that is very pleasing to see that the infrastructure team have continued that momentum into the new financial year. And I'll pass over to Andrew to talk about key performance indicators.
Okay, thank you. I'll open up for members for any questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the report. It's a question on page 52 about the drinking water compliance. So there's a comment there to say that under the new rules we're 89% compliant. So I'm aware of some of the issues around contact time for chlorine, but are there other issues that we should be aware of?
Or just invite Mike Monahan, Group Manager of Waters.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. You're quite right. It's all around bacterial compliance with regard to the contact time at our bore sites.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
Great. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Excuse me. I'm just interested, looking at the KPIs, page 44, the community centres are well used as the KPI. It's a narrative measure. There's a lot of narrative measures through this. I'm just using that one as an example, but is data collected about occupancy or usage that could inform a more measurable KPI?
We'll pass that one over to our Acting Chief Customer Officer.
Kia ora koutou, Kerry Lee, Acting Chief Customer Officer. Currently, the data that is collected around the community centres is fairly limited, and that in some parts that's due to the fact that we rely on committees to run many of those spaces. But it is something that we are aware of and are looking into at this to see how we can better collect that data for elected members.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm just wondering, do we have any these are outlined as being non-financial KPIs. Do we have any financial KPIs?
I might defer that one to Cam, our Chief Financial Officer.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of financial KPIs, I guess the main metric for our financial aspects is I guess the reporting against the budget as a whole, and we do provide quite a bit of I guess explanation around that, and that's both in terms of operating capital and in terms of how we're tracking against our debt forecasts.
Okay, thanks. Just to drill down a bit, I guess my question relates, so do we have any financial reporting on any of our facilities, such as Conference and Function Centre, Arena, community centres? I guess with our revenue and financing policy, we have the funding source and we have the parameters that are determined in our LTP. Is there anywhere that we report to check that we're compliant with our funding policy?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is. So when we go about setting budgets, obviously it's something that we take into account, because that's when we determine the amount of rates versus other income sources. So that's primarily part of the planning process. But at the end of the year, in the annual report, we also have a page around how we actually did against those targets. So that's where that is also reported from an actual basis.
Okay, so is that the only place that we would find, okay, so for example, if we weren't compliant with our funding policy in one area, would we not find out about that till the annual report?
There's two places you would find out about that. You would acknowledge that as part of adopting an annual budget, and there was, if I remember, a decision where we decided to not raise, say, bag fees because there was some discussion from debate about that around the behaviours that would cause if we raised them too high too quick. So those are the types of places where elected members would make that decision. But in terms of the actuals, it would be the annual report. And the reason why it's done there is spending and revenue profiles aren't what I would call linear through the year. They do have different timings. So some revenue, for argument's sake, and I'll use dog registrations, happen right at the very front of the year. Others happen throughout the year. Rates happens quarterly. So because of those timing differences, it's actually quite difficult to get any sort of sense of how we, during the year, and that's why we report it in the annual report.
Okay, thanks. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sort of in the same area as Councillor Naylor. I'm just looking at page 49 and looking at the second measure for resource recovery there. I just noted, I'm interested there in the option of a narrative measure when we have a decrease in per capita, like a volume waste. It seems like a metric measure with a narrative target, and the explanation there is very narrative. Just curious that we have no stats there to indicate actual tracking towards our target of 38 to 48%. And recently, when the WIMP report update came to us, we had a really excellent appendix which had a lot of that tracking information. So I'm just curious as to why we wouldn't reflect how we're tracking towards that target here in a data measure rather than a narrative one.
The narrative measures allow us to flesh out the sort of the story behind the numbers, but I do accept in those two examples at least, we need to put more numbers into the narrative to, in a sense, to give you the best of both worlds.
Thank you. That would be great, because I think one of the other things that's confused me there is that the measure refers to per capita volume, and the waste diversion target doesn't specify whether that's a sort of citywide level or per person. So it would be cool to get some clarity on that. And just further up, page 47, Eco-City goals. Similar question there for Measure 1, which says in the narrative that the Low Carbon Fund continues to identify and fund opportunities. I'm just wondering, did we fund anything through the Low Carbon Fund in this quarter?
I'd have to come back to you on that one, but yeah, Chief Planning Officer, maybe I'll answer that one.
Through you, Mr. Chair, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. There's 3 or 4 projects which at the moment are sitting with the Chief Executive for approval. Most of those relate to the purchase of new electric cars.
Thank you very much. One final one for me, the biogas generator. Do we have any idea how long that's expected to be offline for? Biogas generator is mentioned at the beginning of the report.
Just defer that one to our Waters Group Manager.
Come forward, Mike, if you could, and use the mic, just for those recording online.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, Mike Monaghan, Group Manager, Three Waters. The biogas generator is now back online, but we will be doing more maintenance throughout the year on that.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with apologies to Mike, a follow-up question in that area. So the nature of it being offline was, why was it offline?
There was a mechanical fault with the equipment itself, which had a long lead time for repair.
Thank you. And you referred to upcoming maintenance plans. Is that more time offline then?
It will be for scheduled maintenance offline, yes.
Yeah. Is there a change in terms of when it's offline in terms of our greenhouse gas footprints, or is it really just an energy and cost efficiency thing?
It's an energy and cost efficiency thing, yeah.
Great, thank you. And overall, would you describe the system as well-maintained and suitable for purpose?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. A couple other questions, Mr. Chair. Just firstly, for Scott, thanks for introducing the kind of new reporting format and the some of the transition arrangements there, but just, and you kind of mentioned, I felt like some of the downsides of some of the transition in terms of uncertainties and that, but kind of overall, how has the experience been? Is it more efficient? Is it simpler? Are there any benefits of all the money that we put into that massive computer system?
Each system has its own pros and cons. Some of the more transactional things are a few more involved steps in terms of processing. The real benefit is that we don't rely on an on-premise system, so that we don't have to do the upkeep and maintenance of servers and that sort of stuff. The downside is it's internet-based, so if we have any internet outages, we sort of have no system. So pros and cons, I can't say negatively or positively either way. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. Around the dashboard that you've supplied for us and those kind of things, Are those things that could be shared in either kind of real time or kind of monthly updates with the public through our website?
We can't do real time because there is a lot of month-end transactions to bring the financials into line. We will share those with elected members once they've been through the executive team. So the October ones are due at the LT meeting next week, so you should see those fairly shortly afterwards. In regards to releasing to the public, I'll probably look to Cam just to provide clarity on whether that can be done.
I guess it could be, but I guess the flip side to it is it hasn't been through this process here. You don't get the same level of detailed explanations as you get through the quarter report, so they are very, I guess, summary level. And the reason why, just to elaborate on Scott's point around real time, there are a lot of sort of what we do accruals and that sort of stuff on a month-end basis, and so you probably don't get a lot of benefit of tracking it day to day. It's a month to month, much more meaningful tracking.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. That's great, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I also like the new way it's been put together. It looks really good. My first question's on page 25. Projects on hold and unable to be progressed. Can you just list or give us a hint of what those are? Because there's no transparency on what they are.
I would have to come back to you around specific projects. They're usually growth type related ones where we need a developer to progress something before we can then do the piece of work. I may just look to Chris, our Chief Infrastructure Officer, to see if he can add anything further to that.
Apologies, Chris Nyberg, Chief Infrastructure Officer. Sorry, I was momentarily distracted. Can you repeat the question?
Well, it just says projects on hold and unable to be progressed. It's using the word unable to be progressed. That's the word that I was troubled by.
Which word? The unable?
Yeah. So and also the transparency of what projects they were. I'm on page 25.
I'd have to go and double check and come back to you, but yeah, I don't have that data at hand, but I could certainly follow up and provide you exactly which ones those are.
That'd be great.
And why. Yep.
Thank you. My second question is on page 32 of the report. It's the vacancies. Just wanting to know, there's 88 vacancies, well, 92 numbers of staff and 88 FTEs. Just what departments are we in that we've got the vacancies?
Kia ora through the chair, and our Whakatane Chief People and Performance Officer. We still have a bit of an issue with our data, and we hope to have that resolved by the next report. Currently, we are in the active recruitment for about 29 vacancies, and all vacancies that we are managing, we're not having any issues filling at this stage, and all of our vacancies are across all of our units.
So why does this report say that we've got 92 here and this number of staff vacant? Is there a problem with the report?
Yeah, there is a problem with the data that we're accessing that from, so we don't have a centralised point of data.
So we should just put a line through the report and say it's incorrect?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Sorry to come back in a second time. I just, still on the KPI issue, I just wanted a little bit more clarity. On page 39, just as in another example, the Central Energy Trust arena also has a narrative measure, but the measure says increase in use of Central CET arena. And then the numbers actually are a decrease from this time last year. but we still have yellow. I mean, there's clearly a high level of usage, but I guess my question is where there's just generalised terms like increase and then it's a narrative measure, do we have an objective way to determine whether that should be in yellow or orange? And when would the threshold be met if it's just a generalised narrative sort of description? I mean, we've got a sea of yellow here, and I'm just wanting to get a bit more of a sense of when that would, for not just for these ones that I've identified, but for many of the narrative measures, when that would go to, when we would expect that to go to orange, so that something would be flagged with us.
So the yellow means that it's off track at the moment, but that the managers think they will be back on track by end of the year. So it's more of a time thing. We wouldn't have any yellows in the third quarter, but we wouldn't expect to have more in the first quarter, because there is more time for officers to do remedial actions to get back on track.
Okay.
So is there actually a number that officers know when it would be yellow versus green? Or is it just someone's judgment on the day?
It's mostly our judgment.
Okay.
Alongside other, it's not just a number thing, we also look at the reasons behind it. And yeah, if it was very clear that we couldn't get back on track, that the numbers were just so low that we would never get back on track, it could be a red in this.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. Page 34, around Kiki Whenua, and that is a red. I think that was sort of an answer to Councillor Harper's what wasn't actually online, what wasn't on track. How are we tracking there? We've got a couple of partners there with the Transport Agency. Are we close there to solving some of those roadblocks? Excuse the pun.
Through you, Mr Chair. Yeah, certainly there's some work for ourselves to do in terms of the water and wastewater, but discussions are continuing with Waka Kotahi. So after the submission that we made on the speed, proposed speed changes to Pioneer Highway, the last conversation was that they wanted to look at a broader agreement between the council and Waka Kotahi regarding the future management of Pioneer Highway. So that is something we need to follow up.
So, in your opinion, is that positive, negative, or we're in la-la land still?
I think we're still looking for some certainty, greater certainty from Waka Kotahi.
Right, okay, thank you. Page 52, and this is a Mike question, I think. The drinking water standards, as we know, or drinking water assurance rules, the compliance goalposts moved. We won't meet 100% of compliance, but any idea when that will come right?
Through the chair, it's hard to put a hard and fast date on that, Mr Mayor. But we sort of need to look at our capital investment through the LTP to resolve some of those issues. From an operational perspective, we're everything else around the chlorination, etc., of our supplies all is happening now. It's just some of those infrastructure capital bills that we need to resolve via the next LTP. Okay, and the other measures, because there's a number of other measures, we seem to be pretty well in the green on all of those. Is the issue that we're having with that goalpost change around compliance, are other councils in that same position as well? Absolutely, yeah. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. There's no further questions. We'll move into comment and debate. I'm happy to move the recommendations as on the screen, which match the order paper, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comment or debate. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and thanks to officers. A good report and a good start to the financial year across all areas, really. And the dashboard, thanks for that. I like that, and I think that'll be a really good monthly update opportunity that I'd certainly welcome. Just following on from some of my questions around the KPIs, I realise these are primarily non-financial KPIs, but I do think that as much as we can, KPIs should still be measurable. I think that's perhaps not something to look at now, but something for us to think about going into the LTP next year as we look at our format. It occurred to me also, and when the CCOs were reporting back last week, the level of detail that we had in some of their KPIs that far exceeded the sort of oversight or information that we have on some of our some of the organisations, some of the areas within council's control. I guess I'm thinking about things like the arena, the conference and function centre, perhaps some of our community facilities, even the parking revenue, that sort of thing. If we only really get the detail of that at annual report, it doesn't necessarily flag to us if something's not perhaps on track. So I guess, and the other thing that occurred to me in a recent LTP workshop, when officers brought to our attention that the social housing revenue wasn't compliant with our funding policy, and that was something they were raising with us. But it occurred to me that that wasn't something that got flagged through our quarterly reporting or any sort of reporting that I am aware of. If in any area something is not compliant with our policy. So I just wanted to flag those as things that I perhaps think could be improved going forward. I'm not suggesting that it has to happen right now, but just something for officers to think about if there is a way that our regular reporting can trigger anything that should really be coming to our attention, and also perhaps some more measurable targets for some of our own facilities.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Chair. I just wanted to say it's a really good financial performance for the first quarter. It's, I think, the first time that I've seen actuals exceed budget in terms of renewals in all the time I've been on council. So, and congratulations to everybody who's been involved with that, and also to have a slight surplus as well at this stage, given all the pressures that of costs that we're under, I think is very good. So it needs to be acknowledged. I just wanted to make some comments about the library performance, which also under difficult circumstances of having some of the community libraries unavailable for a period of time, has increased visits by 20% in the first quarter, which is huge. And also, in terms of the number of programs that are being delivered, in the first 3 months of the year, 684 programs were delivered with 17,104 attendees. That's a huge community impact. And I do feel, and I know I've said this before, that sometimes some really good areas of work in council get a little bit hidden in the finer detail of the quarterly performance report. But it really is worth taking the time to look at the amount of work that's going on and the community impact. And I'd just like to offer my thanks and congratulations to all of the library team for that great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thanks to the team for putting the report together. I realise it's going to have some teething problems when you're putting a new report together from the new system. But I think when you're putting the resourcing report and you realise it's got errors in it, I think you should just pull it, because I think putting a report in with errors in it, it doesn't bode well, particularly for the Chief People Officer. It's not great. So I think that report should have been pulled before the report came out. When it comes to the on hold projects, it would have just been good to, because you've got a comment here that says projects unable to be progressed. I know they are probably throughout the report, would have been quite good to have them listed, and then they are more transparent. So that's just some feedback, but a great way of starting off a new way, an era for this new reporting. So well done, and well done to your team for the way you are doing it going forward. So well done to you and your team. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also wanted to come and give a shout out to the library, so I'll echo my colleague Councillor Johnson's comments. Particularly, I think that additional to that, it's a really good example of where quantitative measures and narrative measures have been merged to give a really cool, fulsome picture of what's going on and the impact and effectiveness of that and the scale at which that's occurring. So, yeah, I do have, I think, a little concern that we can use narrative measures to give us a green or an on-track score by virtue of a big list of activities, but without that quantitative scale, the statistics or anything to indicate the effectiveness of that, it's still just a little high level. But I do appreciate that we do see that level of detail elsewhere in other reports. So it's not that it doesn't exist or that we don't see it. It's just maybe not reflected here all of the time. And the other thing I wanted to put in there was that I was really heartened to see on page 44 that we are considered good and responsible landlords, and that we do care for our tenants and make sure that our properties are fit for them to live in and thrive. So that was great to read. So thank you so much for this report. It's an epic amount of work, just huge, and thank you very much for it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, colleagues, and particularly thank you to all the staff who have obviously done an incredible amount of work. It is fantastic to see a quarterly report use a word like momentum in it, especially when the numbers actually back it up. So there's been a huge amount of work actually done, and it's really appreciate those efforts. I would like to see us give some thought, especially with the new reporting platforms and some of these new dashboards coming out, about how we communicate with the public in terms of what we are delivering, and whether that's on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, on a real-time basis, as is appropriate is fine. But, there's plenty of chatter in the community about, council is delivering, council isn't delivering, I would think it could be useful to think about some of the information that is already brought into this report, making it a bit more accessible to the public. I know that as elected members, we can, refer people to page 86 of the agenda that happened on whatever of November. They've zoned out by that time. I think having something that is very community facing, that actually underscores, what is being done with public money, how well we're actually delivering and executing, would be an opportunity well taken by us and by council to have a strong interface with the community. Would certainly concur with colleagues as well in terms of some of the comments around measures and how we continue to strengthen things there. But overall, it's a fantastic report, and very much appreciated to staff who have brought this through.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to thank the officers, in fact, all the staff. It's a really excellent start, and as Councillor Barrett said, momentum. First time I can recall that infrastructure renewals capitals got out of the blocks, out of the starting blocks and running in the first quarter. Normally we're planning and we're planning and we're planning, and there's policy gets in the way and something doesn't quite go right, and we don't get started till the second or the third quarter, and we play catch up the entire year. If ever there was a year we needed to get out of the blocks, well, this is it. So well done. And look, and effectively things are on budget too, so that's great. Just a couple of items. The first one, some of those reds, I think Kiki Whenua, we've got to keep an eye on that. It probably is our first greenfields subdivision that we can get out of the ground. There is some roadblocks there, and I think we need to get with our city partners and understand what they actually are, because they're actually holding the city back. And effectively, outside brownfields, there's not a lot of sections. You talk to any real estate agent in Palmerston North at the moment, and there are literally very few sections in the market, and that affects us as a city. So I think we've got to get on top of that, and I know the officers are trying really hard, and this isn't a dig at the officers, this is more of a dig at our partners. The water compliance, I think we've got to understand the goalposts have moved there. I have great faith in our officers around waters that we'll eventually get there, but there is a bit of cost, and we just need to understand that and debate that in the upcoming LTP. Second point, I agree with Councillor Naylor around professionally run facilities. We should have some more numbers around those, and I think they're probably there and they're quite easy to get around things like stadiums and convention centres. But the community centres are slightly different. Those councillors that go to a lot of community events, that go to those facilities, and a number of us were at many of them at the weekend, we know they're run by volunteers. We know sometimes it's a bit hard to put all this into a quarterly report. We don't pay them a cent, but they run that on behalf of the city. I think the officers can probably glean a little bit more than just some narrative, but I know that most of them are very well utilised, in fact some of them heavily utilised. And we know that we're going to have a debate coming up around older and renewals coming up in some of these community centres. So I'd hate to think that we've got a little bit of chatter going on about underutilised community centres when actually it's the opposite. They're very well used. So, and also with Councillor Barrett, I totally agree. We do get a little bit of flack, and as the Mayor, I constantly get a little bit of ribbing about underperformance, and sometimes you're sort of pushing back because you know that the narrative, again, isn't correct. So I do stress to the officers, perhaps more in the communications team, that there is a community, a city summary, which Joe Public can understand, that is gleaned from these real numbers, but is put in a way in a one-pager that says, this is what the city's on top of, this is what we've done this quarter, and it goes out via all mediums, whether that be online, social, in the paper, whatever it needs to be. It's a bit of a missing, there's a little bit of a missing gap there. But overall, just want to say we actually have delivered so far. Still a big year coming, but you've started the year very well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to add a highlight too, which has been picked up by Councillor Johnson and the Mayor around the capital expenditure. Not just the renewal, but I also believe the new and the growth component too is actually pretty strong compared to previous quarters, first quarters in the past. And so really wanted to acknowledge that and yeah, I guess echo that. There's no further comments. The recommendation before us has been moved and seconded, so I'd invite a vote. Councillor Naylor's vote get captured. Oh, sorry, Harper's vote. That's 13. 13 votes for, it's unanimous. That would be. We're okay? I believe that's been captured. That moves us on to item 8, which is the Treasury report, and invite Steve Patterson, our Strategy Manager for Finance, forward to present. Thank you.
Good morning, elected members. This quarterly report, not a great deal of new focus this time. I think we had quite a discussion, if I recall, at the last quarter, and from my perspective, there's not a lot changed. The market's still challenging in terms of being able to get money when you want it out there publicly, and to get it at a price that's one that we'd be prepared to think's reasonable in the longer term. So we have borrowed a bit of money during the quarter, and that's to fund the capital program that you rightly mentioned has been progressing reasonably well. So that means we have been in the market. The interest rates remain relatively high, and the average cost of our capital for the quarter was fractionally higher than what we'd assumed in the budget. But I guess I'd signalled that was a possibility at the last discussion. Since this report, we've been in the market again, raised 15 million earlier in the week to fund more of our ongoing work. And as you will have read from day to day in the market, things do change in terms of where interest rates are, both long and short-term interest rates. And so I guess we face whatever we can on the day, and so there is some risk on a particular day when we're raising that it might not be the best day, but because we're raising progressively through the year, we hope we're not exposed unreasonably to those market movements. So that's all I want to comment on.
Thank you. Open for questions. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Steve. Just on page 77, you've got there that the effective average interest rate for the year to date is 4.36, compared with a budgetary assumption of 4.2.
Yes.
What, if that's to continue, what, and if we were to deliver our full capital program, what sort of shortfall are we looking at in terms of what we've budgeted for interest in this year?
Yeah, I guess it depends a little bit on the timing of when we need to get to the market and what does happen. Progressively, some of our cover through the swaps is starting to roll off a little bit, and we become slightly more exposed to the newer interest rates. So in the last few days, those latest sums we've borrowed have been still high, but tracking down a fraction from what we have had. So I really can't guess at the moment just quite what we will likely be an outcome. I'll be able to give I think a better picture after we've had the next quarter.
So if you could just remind me, obviously our budget for this year will be on our current debt plus some factored in for the debt that we incur throughout the year from our capital new. Sometimes we've only budgeted some of that interest on the basis that we won't likely deliver all of our capital program, but with the progress that's currently being shown in terms of the delivery, are you able just to remind us if we've factored in for full delivery of that capital program in terms of our interest, or is it less than that?
Yes, we have a very broad way of going about it. That is, we assume that 50%, on average, 50% of our interest cost, we assume we're going to borrow for half of the year, effectively, for the new debt that's required during the year. And it does depend on progress and particular programs and when stuff's drawn, but usually, because we're completing more work as the year goes on, the level of debt's going to rise, and so I would expect that there will be an overspend in the end.
Okay, so it's 50. We've based it on 50%, not because a few years ago
we did have 1 year where we did less than that.
Yeah,
but it's 50%.
But we've gone back to 50%. Okay, thanks. That's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question on page 84, wanting to clarify my understanding. So we've got 151 million fixed. Is that implying that we have $71 million of debt floating currently, or am I misreading that?
Let me just double check.
Page 4.
Yes, I'm just having a look at the. Yes, it's the fixed component is a combination of the particular levels of debt, that the tranches themselves that are fixed when we borrow them, and the effect of the swaps. So yes, in theory, we've got the difference between the 151 and the 250 that would be floating. And
is that a normal amount to have floating, about a third of our debt? Is that a result of a council policy or just internal decisions?
We've got a ratio. We're saying that we've got roughly 68% at that particular point, and that is consistent with the policy. We would normally perhaps look to try to have it a fraction higher than that, but there haven't been opportunities really over the last few months to fix at a rate that's been sensible to fix at. We've been just trying to find the opportunity to do some more of that.
So what is the policy that you're, I apologise, I haven't
I have that
That's right.
it's sitting here in front of me. Well, it varies for year on year. You'll look in the various buckets over the 10 years as to what the portions are that should be fixed along on that same page. And so, yeah, I haven't got the figure in my head. It's just quite what the overall percentage is, but that's...
Fair enough. So final question then. So we were given a weighted average fixed rate of fixed rate instruments. It would be interesting to see the opposite, the weighted average fixed rate or rate of non-fixed instruments. So effectively, what is the weighted average of the debt that we're holding?
That's floating.
Floating.
Yeah, well, the normal, at the moment, well, the margin varies, as you'll see in the schedule there, quite a lot, but we'd be borrowing in the market at around about the bank bill rate these days is about 5.7%, and it depends on the margin for the particular bond as to how much above that we were paying. The stuff we borrowed this last week, we were borrowing between 6 and 6.2%. So that sort of level. And so for as long as that bank bill rate stays up there and the margins stay at the sort of levels they are, we're going to be paying a bit over 6%, I would expect.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There's no further questions. Thank you, Steve. I'll move the recommendations before us. Councillor Naylor will second that we note the performance of Council's Treasury activity for the quarter ending 30th of September 23. Open it up for any comment or debate. I guess the comment I'll make is, Councillor Wood, you've raised a fair question around limitations around the policy, if any, and the reason for having so much on floating in this type of environment. And I think that's just something that for us to have an ongoing awareness of. That would be the only comment I'd want to make out of the questions today. There's no further questions, so I'll invite a vote. Passed 13 votes for, and that's passed unanimously. Members will now move to item 10, which is the Panaco Park decision on the reserve classification and future of the Girl Guides New Zealand Hall, and invite Aaron Phillips, our activity manager for parks, to present this report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Mayor and Councillors. An issue that's been for you a couple of times through this process, and you're probably well versed in, so I won't delve into it in any great detail. But as you can see from the report, the weight of submissions was in favour of reclassifying the park. The objections were largely about the effects that might be felt of whatever activity might take place in that hall in the future, with particular concerns around alcohol, noise and traffic congestion. They're matters that you could manage, or we can manage, through a lease proposal for that hall, should another community group take over its ownership and operation. So we don't think that they are significant enough to set aside the proposal to reclassify the land, which would broaden the types of use that can be in the hall. I guess the major point in the report is a suggestion that Council consider purchasing the hall. The rationale for that was that the Girl Guides initially approached us several years ago to exit their lease and ownership of the hall. We've been working through the various processes that are adopted in various policies of Council to consider the strategic direction for the land and the hall. Currently there's a proposal being considered by yourselves, or a feasibility study approved for the consideration of an Awapuni community hub and library. Some of the options for that are considering the use of the Panaco land. Given that I'm assuming that your decision on that will be part of the 10-year plan, I wondered whether, given the relatively modest price for the purchase of the hall, we might ameliorate the ongoing delays from the Girl Guides perspective and purchase the hall. There is some risk associated with that if you decided during the 10-year plan process that you did not wish to proceed with the community hub, or it was scaled in a way in which the Panako land was not required for that. Then we would be coming back to on selling that hall to a community group. So we would probably lose a little bit of money there in the transaction costs, depending on who was available to purchase it and what they could afford, unless of course you decided to retain it and rent it as a council-owned property, and then there will be additional costs associated with that, with maintenance and renewal that up to now have been borne by the community groups. And so I hope that summarises the sorts of questions and thoughts you might have, and open to questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Aaron. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. It is a question about the hall. So in 4.1.4, you talk about the amount that we required in immediate maintenance. Have we done a detailed inspection, and is that figure based on that, or is it an estimated cost?
It's in footnote 10 at the bottom of page 100, and excuse me, I'm at that stage of life where grasses need to come on and off. Page 115, you can see that we completed a building report in August 2022, and that was to help any potential purchasers of the building understand what they were getting into. That isn't a detailed estimate. We haven't had a builder go through and price jobs, but our property division looked at that report and suggested an amount of that amount to roughly deal with the main issues, and taking the view that we're getting by rather than trying to do a complete upgrade on that.
Okay, so it'd be fair to say that's an estimate, but it's based on a report?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron, for the work that's gone in here. Just around the purchase opportunity, is that an agreed price with the with Girl Guides?
Girl Guides National Office had previously signalled to us a price range that they were looking for. It's pretty modest, in the order of $15,000 was what was mentioned. That was based on their understanding of what the sorts of prices that community groups could typically afford and past transactions of a similar nature in other locations. So it's not a sale and purchase agreement, it's not written, but there was a verbal understanding that that's about what they would have sought from other community groups.
And in your view, by switching from a potential community to community transaction to a community to council transaction, is there a risk that that price discussion gets revisited and we end up being a bit captured by our own recommendations today?
I did have a conversation with the officer at the National Office who was administering this process. She indicated some level of comfort with that amount, but I haven't heard back whether that was a firm undertaking and whether she'd had conversations with her board or others. So there is a little bit of risk there, yes, but I can't quantify it for you.
And when you say that amount in that conversation, that's the 15 or that's the 20?
That's the 15.
Right, thank you. Second question was just on the recommendations. 1A lists a number of matters, and it says that they can be managed, which is somewhat hypothetical to say that things can be managed. And I just wondered, from an officer's advice point of view, is it appropriate to merely recognize that they can be managed, or would it be more appropriate to recognize that or to indicate that they will be managed?
Apologies. If you'd like to make that change, Councillor, I can support that. They would be matters that would be dealt with through the lease, and you'd have the opportunity to review that and ensure that you're comfortable that they have been dealt with. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for those answers, and just signal to Chair that I would like to see that change.
Okay. Aaron, there's no, late arrival. Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pick up on that point from Councillor Barrett further before that change is made, and whether or not physical road treatments are something that we can provide for in a lease provision, or whether a budget line would be attached to that, and that's an additional something that we'd be approving.
Good point, councillor. The physical road treatments probably sounds a little bit more significant than it was. The issue that the residents raised there was congestion. The proposed where cars park on both sides of the road. The solution is no parking lines as opposed to something of a large physical nature.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. There's no further questions. Appreciate you presenting that report. I'm happy to move the recommendations before us in their completeness, seconded by the Deputy Chair, Councillor Naylor. Did you want to speak to that? And then I'll go. Yep, your floor is yours.
Just before getting it, I was going to suggest that we do make that change from can to will that was suggested by Councillor Barrett. I'd be happy to second it.
Yep, I'm happy to move it in those terms. Just if you direct us to it, Councillor Naylor. 1A, that's right. Happy with that? Councillor Barrett, did you want to speak any further? I'm just picking up on your comment. Does that capture your position in the comments? Thank you. Councillor Johnson, floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak briefly in support of all of the recommendations. I think that this is a strategic piece of work, given the thinking that we're doing about the community hub and the possible use of St Mark's. It doesn't commit us to doing that work, but also it does, I guess, give us a little bit of a breathing space, because even were we to decide that that work at St Mark's was to go ahead, it's going to be several years before there's anything in place there. And in the meantime, the building is deteriorating and, you know, the girl guys, you know, I mean, it won't be a building that can be used for too much longer unless the repairs are done. So I think it gives us a bit of breathing space, but it doesn't preclude us using that space in future as part of the community hub. So I think it's a good compromise position. I understand what's been said about the risks of purchasing the building, but I think if we don't do that, the building won't be there much longer. It doesn't mean that we cannot subsequently decide to go ahead with the hub and use that space in that development. So I would encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like Councillor Johnson. I think it's this is sensible. You know, we are looking at in the future at a hub, a library, a hub in that, in what is our biggest suburb, and it makes sense to do this work. I think the risk's pretty low too, and the numbers are pretty low. So it's a good start, and I think it's quite a sensible first stage of what may be something really quite exciting for the Awapuni community. So I urge you to support. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further speakers in queue, so I'd invite a vote. That is passed unanimously, 13 votes for. We'll continue on to item 11, which is the 2023 Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment. Invite Tara Leonard, Planner, and Sam Dowse, Senior Planner, to present this report.
Kia ora koutou everyone, my name is Sam Dowse, planner here in the Strategic Planning Unit, alongside my colleague Tara, also a planner in the Strategic Planning Unit. Happy to bring you the 2023 Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment to you today. Tara and I have prepared the assessment together, Tara with a particular focus on the housing side and myself on the business and industrial. We'll take the memo and report as largely read, but some key notes from us. The document is a research report, and in terms of where it sits, it informs our future development strategy, which will set out our broad locations for growth, both for housing and business and industrial land. And then it also informs our district plan changes as they relate to residential and industrial supply. And it also informs the long-term plan and funding considerations that sort of come out of funding growth. On that note, through you, Mr. Chair, happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you to you both. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. Just around your comment in 3.8 in the sufficiency assessment, where you've noted that, the most recent reports quarterly to council, we've had the red light on whether or not we've got enough zoned land. Would it be fair to say that this assessment has sort of superseded that reporting and that we can now be confident that we do have enough zoned land?
Yes, that would be my view, that we can. Through this assessment, we've taken a deeper look at what it means to be plan-enabled, infrastructure-ready and commercially and reasonably feasible. So, yes, that would be my view.
Okay, so could we expect that quarterly reporting will now indicate the results of this assessment?
Yes, I would just refer to John O'Ferguson, Pie City Planning Manager, just to confirm that.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, this is new to me. I've just come back after a period of leave, so it's a little bit odd. Look, I think probably the answer is a little bit nuanced. I think what the report's saying is that if you look at the MPS requirements, the report is saying if you look at capacity within the existing urban area, yes, we have enough land in the short to medium and long term, but then if you layer over top options for the community in terms of do we have enough greenfield land in the short, medium, long term, then I think the answer is a little bit different. So I think going back and looking at that particular measure, we'd have to sort of think about this report and just think about the context of that measure and just make sure we're consistent when we're putting that in the future. It may be that that measure may have to be contextualised a little bit more in the future.
Okay, thank you. It is a bit confusing, I suppose, in the same meeting to have two what appear to be contradictory pieces of information. So in the quarterly report we have, no, you're not meeting the NPSUD, and then we have this one, which granted is a much more detailed assessment, saying, yeah, it's okay.
I could probably provide a bit more context. So when we look at what is ready in the short term, we're talking across a 3-year period. So in that period, we expect some of our greenfield areas to become infrastructure ready and for those areas to be developed.
All right. Okay. Yeah, no, that is helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. A few questions from me. Going back a few years, we had a workshop, can't remember if it was 3 or 6 years ago when this report was coming to us, and it was outlined that we could address this in 3 ways, either having low, medium or high expectations about the level of growth. Is that, I guess what my question is, the number in this report of 3,993 is a very definitive number. And I've read the report and can see where the indicators have come to point in that direction. How much of a range do the indicators give, or how do you get to that exact number, and where does that sit within the range?
So with our targets we've put in, the numbers for the bottom lines, which is where you're seeing that 393 figure, that has come from our hybrid population growth model that's been adopted. So we took that and we looked at the household changes in size, and what we do is we look at over the short term, which is the 3-year cycle, and then we take it and we put it into a demand figure of how many homes we'll need over the short term. So it's a combination of a model that Stacey, our city economist, has prepared, and we've used that as our base for our figures.
And does that methodology arrive you at an exact number as opposed to a range?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so there's no assumptions around whether that's a low, medium or high growth?
So the hybrid model is a combination of pretty much of a medium and high and a mix. But if you want to hear more about that, I can defer that question to Stacey Bell.
We actually have a low and a high range as well, but the medium is the most likely scenario that has been adopted, and that's based on the high growth projections from Stats New Zealand as a starting point. That reflects the high net international migration that we've had relative to what was previously projected, which was actually zero over the 2023 year. So that reflects the Stats New Zealand high starting point with the medium growth scenario layered over that from Infometrics over the long term. So that's where those projections have come from. But we also have a low range growth model and a high as well. But the medium has been adopted as the most likely scenario, and that's where those numbers have come from.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more questions. In response to Councillor Johnston's question and what's outlined in 3.8 of the sufficiency assessment, based on the previous information that we have been provided over the last year or two, budgets have been put in place additional to what we had quite significantly. If the picture is looking like we've got availability of it looks like it's around double of what we actually need, will we need to make some decisions around slowing or reducing some of that greenfield development, and if so, what impact would that have on the budgets that are currently in place?
It's certainly not the case that we're flush with greenfield land. We would still need to continue on with our greenfield growth areas, but ultimately that will be a decision that comes through the future development strategy and long-term plan funding considerations as to how you kind of balance demand and where that demand is placed, whether it be greenfield or within our existing urban environments.
Okay, and just the last question relates to the mix of infill versus greenfield on page 121. And the report seems to indicate that we've arrived at that based on observing what the current practice is. Are there levers that council can use to put more of an emphasis on infill and less of an emphasis on greenfield, or do we actually have to just follow what the current trends are?
Yes, there are certainly levers, the future development strategy being one of those, and it's a tricky one because through this national policy statement on urban development, we have to provide for demand and provide sufficient development capacity. So yes, we can kind of shift those levers to direct that demand into the infill, but because we see demand for greenfield, and there's only so much supply within our infill areas, we still will need, greenfield will still be part of that picture.
Okay, so we have to use those levers, we'd need to wait for the future development statement?
Yes, which is in a draft form going through to the joint steering group that we're having next week, and then it will come up as part of the long-term plan documents.
And so we would feed that into that. Would that be decision-making around during the long-term plan process?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Tara and Sam. So, understand all the zoning of land, but is there any sort of commentary or connection to getting this to market? I mean, I just teased out how, Kiki Whenua has been, which is already part of your numbers, but not a single section's been delivered there yet after 4 or 5 years. So is there any commentary around why things are so slow in developing here?
As far as what's in the assessment, we've just talked to when we know infrastructure development infrastructure to support development and bringing those things to those parcels to market will occur. That's about as far as the assessment goes.
So what infrastructure, so basically infrastructure just in time, is that what you're saying?
No, so what we've done is, as part of saying when we think stuff will come online,
Right.
we have looked at our long-term plan funding that is existing. So Kiki Whenua, Whakarongo, Napier Road residential extension area, and sort of factored that into when it will come online, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. So we have a lever there if we wanted to push a little bit harder to try and get some of this zoned land actually physically being used, or is that right?
Yeah, I think the message probably is that those greenfield areas that are already zoned, infrastructure is coming within the short term, 1 to 3 years. So yeah.
Okay, but we're still reliant on other city partners, aren't we? Like Transport Agency, Regional Council. I mean, it took 2 years to get a consent for Whakarongo, so we do have some issues there, don't we?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. Just a question kind of following on about that discussion about demand and how we respond to it. And just wanting to know, is it demand overall, or is it that we specifically have to respond to demand for, say, greenfield versus infill, or do we need to respond to demand for, 3-bedroom houses versus 1-bedroom houses? At what level are we required to respond to demand?
So when we look at demand, we look at it across the city, and we look at certain locations, and we look at demand by type. So, for example, when we look at demand by type, we look at for standalone dwellings and for attached dwellings. And then we look at our past demand. So we look at the building consents that have been built, and we look at where they have been built and what kind. And what we're starting to see is that demand's not concentrated in one area, it's across the whole city. So then we have a look at that, and we look at how we can respond through plan changes in the future development strategy.
Thanks. And so then when we look at those demand signals and consider signals like affordability around kind of overall vision for the city, I guess, how do we actually end up weighing those up, or what advice would you have for us in that regard?
A part of the national policy statement reporting is that we've got to look at community need, and we are starting to see a huge demand for 1 and 2 bedroom homes, smaller affordable homes. So we take that into account when we are preparing plan changes and looking at how we can use levers in the district plan to make it easier for developers to build these types of homes.
Thank you. I guess finally then a couple questions actually, just looking here. I guess by signaling an increasing reliance on greenfield over the short to medium to long term, like it's going up at each of those steps, is that likely to have any kind of dampening of appetite for, say, city centre housing investment?
What we have observed over the past 5 years is that as our greenfield supply is becoming less, we are seeing more activity happening in infill. So as our greenfield numbers drop through building consents, we do see a rise in infill.
And so from that, are you saying that we're likely to see the opposite as well, that if we see a whole lot more greenfield turned on, that we might see a decrease in infill?
I would just say that as part of kind of looking at the overall package and what's coming in our city growth plan, that greenfield figure as it goes up is in recognition that long-term signalled greenfield growth areas like a Kotiri, Kakatangiata are coming online in those phases. So that's sort of why that demand shift occurs in the medium and long term.
Thanks, I understand that. I'm just trying to understand if there's likely to be an interaction between that and appetite for investment around city centre housing and infill housing.
From our engagement with the development sector, we didn't have a huge response, but just from that response, they are seeing that people are interested in building within the city boundary, and that some of them do prefer to actually purchase an infill section as it is slightly cheaper and build smaller homes within the city. So there is appetite for demand living within the city.
Great, thank you. Final question was just around the second recommendation. Probably it's just something that I missed along the way, but when it says that council adopt the housing bottom lines, can you just briefly summarize what those bottom lines are that are going into the district plan?
So the bottom
pointing
lines
towards
that are
them?
going into the district plan are on under 1.4 in the memo, and then it's just got the short to medium term, and it's got the number of homes we need, and that includes an additional margin of 20%. So that's going above and beyond. So that will be in the district.
It's just
plan.
those two numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tēnā kōrua. Quick question about the survey that was sent out in May or June this year to the Build Palmy subscribers. What was the response rate to that survey, roughly?
We put the survey in, we put a link to the survey into the May issue and the June issue, and I think we got about 6 or 7 responses. So once we had that response rate, we actually reached out to some of the contacts we had and just asked a few questions like what kind of demand you're seeing, what kind of barriers are you facing providing housing and for business land. So once we did get the poor response, we did reach out to some of our providers.
Excellent. Thank you. And just on the infrastructure ready question, just teasing out what the Mayor was getting at before, am I understanding it right? Just want to make sure I'm right. I've got on the right page. That when we talk about infrastructure ready, it's not just talking about infrastructure that already exists, but it also encapsulates infrastructure that's signalled or planned, but perhaps isn't actually currently existing.
It depends. So the short term, my understanding is it is existing development infrastructure, and then in the medium term and long term that's kind of signalled development infrastructure investment in our long term plan.
Excellent, thank you.
Probably just add to that as well is that once you get through those kind of stringent definitions through the NPSUD, we have sort of factored into this assessment what we know is going to be funded, within that short-term period.
Well, thank you. All right, I'm going to just jump quickly now to a different issue. On page 55, talk about the improved ability of people to save in the housing, for housing deposits. Just going to find that, page 58. And I was just really interested in that analysis, given the cost of living impacts on people's disposable income and the increase of housing values and then the increase in interest payments. So I was just really curious as to how we've arrived at that conclusion that it's easier for people to save now than it has been.
I think we're not certainly saying that it's affordable, and but it is just we've looked relative, to past times and in the present economic conditions. Stacey, you might want to add to that.
Oh, it's page 62 of the agenda, or 58 of the assessment. Oh, it's on under the second, under the separate cover. My apologies.
Oh, my apologies. We use a variety of housing affordability measures. One of them is the ability to save for a deposit. As house prices have fallen, the ability to save for a deposit has improved. So that's one part of the affordability measure that we use, that has actually improved from the current market conditions. In terms of servicing a mortgage, that has become more expensive due to the interest rates. Another measure that we use is the Infometrics housing affordability measure, which shows that because our earnings have increased, our household incomes have increased, and house prices have fallen, average house prices, and our affordability has improved substantially from that measure as well. So yes, it's a mix of affordability outcomes there. More affordable to save for a deposit, less affordable to actually service that mortgage due to the higher interest rates.
That's good, thank you. That's very helpful to understand that. One additional question, it's about the hybrid model, so you might want to stay there. And I'm just, this kind of actually comes from things that we've heard from CCOs and other groups where we've looked at annual reports, and they've reported against various years and have said, we've heard feedback that it's not always helpful to assess particular years against the previous 2 years because of COVID and all those disruptions. So from that perspective, I was really interested in our choice to go for a hybrid model, given on the basis that Infometrics was quite conservative. And that from our 2022-23 indicators, we thought we could go for a bit more of a broader look, perhaps. So I'm just, I would really like to unpack that a little, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So Infometrics, when we procured their model, they were estimating zero net international migration till 2024. We have had 110,200 people enter the country to the year ended August, so it's gone in a different way. Even when that model was provided to us, we were already sitting at well above long-term averages, so it blew what they were projecting out of the water, basically. Yeah, we also have a long-term, Peter Crawford undertook some research to show the long-term historical underestimation of the population in Palmerston North over time, and that showed that we're around 1.5 to 2% less, actually over and above what the Stats New Zealand estimated resident population projects. So on the basis of that, our population is now 91,800 according to Stats New Zealand, with very strong growth over the 2023 year. That stacks up quite well according to that underlying information and assumptions that we have.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies if I've missed something in the report, but I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were around induced demand in terms of greenfield development. So my understanding of your methodology is you've looked at the present demand and the past demand for sections of either category. What are your views that if you zone more land and develop infrastructure for more land, that would in turn increase that land, therefore we'd see disproportionately high demand once large amounts of land is zoned? Is that something that you've considered throughout the report, or is...
I would just say that the sort of rezonings that would occur would be in line with the household numbers that we're, the house numbers that we're projecting. So it wouldn't be our view to go out and rezone a whole bunch of land in excess of the sort of number of houses that we're projecting we'll need to meet demand.
Is that not what we're doing with Kakatangiata? Zoning for 30 years of...
Sorry?
What you've just said seems counter to my understanding of what we're trying to do with Kakatangiata, which is zone a significant amount of land for the next 30 years. Are you suggesting that's not the course of action we're taking or should be taking? I'm just... aren't we about to rezone 700 hectares of land in City West? Would that not go counter to what you're suggesting, that we should only zone for the immediate and projected demand?
But I'd have to defer to Jono on this. Sorry, I'm not across the detail of Kakatangiata. Sorry.
Marina, Councillor. Again, I think that's probably a little bit of a nuanced response there as well, because we are looking at a large number at Kakatangiata, but we're not necessarily saying that that's all going to be rezoned or infrastructure ready within the next 4, 10 or 30 years. So I think what we'll need to do is say, yes, we'll rezone land at Kakatangiata, but in terms of growth infrastructure and our ability to be able to afford that growth infrastructure over the next 30 to 40 years, we may have to just stage that so that we meet market demand. But to your point, we also do it in an affordable manner and in a manner that doesn't necessarily release too much land to the point where you get an oversupply. I think generally speaking, when you look at a developer with greenfield land, they look at that like a mine. How can I mine as much value out of that land as possible? It's very, very unusual that even if we rezone Kakatangiata all at one time, that a developer would release so much land to market that it would soften price. So I think there's a number of mechanisms that we can use in terms of staging, calibrating that with our ability to affordability around being able to service it, and then secondly just market drivers around that supply issue, where I think there's probably going to be a fairly well balanced release of land relative to the demand of that land as well.
appreciate that answer, and I guess my
Councillor Wood, just in addition, the GM for planning, Chief Planning Officer David Murphy would like to comment.
Yeah, just a couple of points to add, I guess, to the answers that are already being provided. I think the NPSUD does require us to look at historical demand to inform future. However, that doesn't mean that we can't take mechanisms to effectively look at ways in which we can make that greenfield land that we zone last as long as possible. So what I mean by that is if we're continuing to incentivise infill and city centre development at the same time, then our strategy can be, you know, how can we look at means and ways of making Kaka Tangiata last 50 years rather than 30 years? So we can do that by working with developers, looking at our development contributions policy, enabling, working with CEDA, looking to bring in new investment into the city. So typically the developers who have been doing greenfield development in the city for the last 30 years, that's what they know and that's what they do. They're good at it. We've provided land for them to do it. But there are, you know, beyond just policy mechanisms, we need to be looking at and thinking about ways, civic and cultural precinct master plan, there will be means and ways of other levers outside of the RMA to look at how we can incentivise, encourage, enable changes in the way in which housing is provided in the city.
Appreciate that, and I guess the follow-up question there is, what I'm trying to get at is, how does this report take into account the perhaps changing nature of demand? So historically and currently we have the developers we have. Potentially by opening up more land for development, we bring in new developers or new players to the market, which would in turn change the structure of demand within the city. How does this report account for that potentially changing structure of what is being demanded by who and at what level?
I think we have to review this every 3 years. We review our DC policy every 3 years and our LTP every 3 years. So the Local Government Act has really enabled us to be able to every 3 years look back on the assumptions, what's changed, what's happened, and how can we then change and look at those levers to respond to the issues you've just raised. I think also through the FDS that we're going to consult on as part of this LTP, you know, councillors also have the ability to look at, I think to Councillor Barrett's comments around, well, at the moment we have an assumption around the split between infill and greenfield, for example. It may be that a lever that the council may want to look at pulling is, well, do we actually encourage more intensification to make, for example, Kaka Tangiata last longer, and the levers around that is around the extent to which potentially we fund growth infrastructure and time it. And you can use those levers then to respond to what's happening in the market and do that every 3 years as you get to review these documents.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you to the officers. There's no further questions. For practicalities, I'm going to pause this item. We're going to break for morning tea and resume at 1:45. When we resume, we'll go to item 9, the report on Waterloo Park, the land exchange proposal decision. And then once that's concluded, we'll go into the recommendations and debate on this item and follow through with the balance of our work. So yeah, we'll break for morning tea till 1:45. Thank you. That moves us back to item 9, which is the Waterloo Park Land Exchange Proposal Decision, and invite Aaron Phillips, our Activity Manager for Parks, to present.
Good morning again, Mr Chair, Mayor and Councillors. As you mentioned, Aaron Phillips, Activity Manager for Parks. We're back seeking a decision on the proposed reserve exchange. It's been a thorough process, and as we can see behind me in the gallery, the community views are well understood, and I have some admiration for the effort that's been put into presenting those views. Given that it's been before you again through a thorough process and several reporting rounds, I won't delve greatly into the report again, similar to Panako this morning, but a couple of matters I thought you may ask questions about that I try and address up front. There's been a matter raised around the possible car parking on the exchange land of the reserve. Yes, there was some indication early in the process that some car parking might be required on the exchanged piece of land if that went ahead. That would have been in the order of about 100 or 200 square metres of land. I just note that car parking on reserves is common. For example, at Waterloo Park itself, next to the Scout Hall, there's 400 square metres of parking provided that serves the function of access to both the Scout Hall, the adjacent sports fields and access to the river. On top of that, there's a 200 square metre access way that's sealed there, so if you included that, there's 600 square metres relating to parking already in place there. At the Ruahine Reserve, or the Ruahine Bend as we call it, used to be called the Fitzroy Bend, there's a small car park there which is 200 square metres of car park in the reserve itself. 60 square metres of access way is technically within the road reserve at that location, so there's 260 square metres of car parking provided there. I guess I'm trying to note that car parking on reserves is not precluded, and I don't see it as a fundamental issue. However, as the detail of the structure plan has been worked through, and that's included reviewing traffic assessments, we have been able to take note of that concern, and through there's an existing access way in that location that can be repurposed for car parking, which would enable us to say quite clearly that if the exchange did go ahead, the 1,300 square metres of land would have no car parking on it. Previously we said it might have some, and we note that that was a concern of some of the submitters, so we've attempted to address that. The new area, if it went ahead within the rezoned area, would have a similar width to that at the bottom of Albert Street and a similar car parking layout, but all of that car parking would be in the road reserve, which would be of the same width as the bottom of Albert Street. Yes, I note the advocacy or desire to have a garden in that location. Yes, a garden is possible, and I hope the report addresses that and gives you some context to what could be provided there if the decision is to retain the land and make it available for that sort of activity. Or community orchard might be a better description. Ideally, something like that would probably start closer to the Scout Hall. That's your source of water. That's a location to store gardening implements if some of the people using it were coming from the wider community and might want to be travelling and not to carry their implements. That's pretty common with some of the gardens in place. To give you an idea of scale, the existing community garden at Awapuni Park is 2,200 square metres. They've filled that up over the last 5 years. It's now at full capacity compared to what the area that they were leased. So that's fill up. The area that could be provided in garden at this location could variously be 700 to 1,500 square metres, depending on whether you're considering the space just next to the Scout Hall and along parallel with the stop bank, or around the corner and on the strip that's under consideration at the moment. So about 3/4 of Awapuni Park if the entire area were used. I thought it was useful just to understand that. The options before you, one, to go ahead with the exchange. No, all of these options will incur some costs for council. in the future if the rezoning occurs. We will need to put a path from where the new river access crosses the stop bank and hook up into the existing Manawatu River shared path network. That will cost about $50,000. If we do want to provide a bit more car parking over and above what will be provided on street as standard as part of a standard road corridor, we'd need an additional $50,000 for that. So we've assumed at this point for the draft budgets that are coming before you that that quantum will be required no matter what this decision. But if you do go ahead with the exchange, there could be anywhere from $25,000 to $82,000 worth of additional costs on the exchange land. The big chunk of that depends on whether or not we need to prevent cars parking on it. That varies a little bit around the city with river entrances. Quite common for us to have a post and rail fence, and that's the expensive item, particularly if it's got a concrete mowing strip underneath it. However, in some locations, and if you think of the parking area next to the Fitzherbert Bridge, we don't have a post and rail fence around that area. We do get the occasional car drive on there and cause a little bit of damage, but we haven't considered it necessary at this point to completely fence that off. So we could start at the lower end of that and see how it went, but there is a risk that we might want to come back and bollard or post and rail fence if it were being treated inappropriately. The status quo under option 2 is to retain the land as is, do nothing else, see whether community initiatives make use of it, and leave it as a strip of land between what would be 2 future residential areas. And that includes declining the exchange. Option 3 is to decline the exchange and proceed with some sort of development in line with some of the submissions that were made to the proposal. If you want to go to the extent of a walkway, there could be costs up to $160,000. If you want a fully accessible concrete walkway that's suitable for wheelchairs and mobility users, it could be cheaper if we're happy with a sort of a gravel path level of service. But a chunk of that cost would be to purchase a small walkway access from the roading network that would be in the plan change area through to that link. So there's a bit of range in that. Some submitters suggested, and comments had been made in previous reports, during previous reports about doing both. At the extreme end for that example, it could be looking up to about $1.3 million if we were to be purchasing 1,300 square metres of residentially zoned land in the Roxburgh area and the little walkway connection. That the land purchase is a large chunk of that. During the development of the report, we thought, well, that's probably you might like a hybrid of that option where I guess we call it the minimum viable product. The area of 1,300 square metres is driven around the space that's in that strip, but you might improve the river access by providing a wider river entrance and enough a little bit less amenity than a full 1,300 square metre exchange might deliver. So we've signalled that as option 4 rather than the full $1.3 million cost, and we've estimated that at around $700,000 to $800,000, again depending a little bit on the detail of post and rail fences and what might be worked through in the detail. So on balance, I've recommended that we proceed with the exchange. I believe that most of that the objections haven't outweighed the benefits in this case, and that we could proceed with the exchange. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Aaron. First going to Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. I'm interested to know if this particular strip of land hadn't been available for an exchange, what would have been suggested for the river access?
That's a good question, Councillor. We would probably have come back with a minimum viable product, so we would have worked with the developer to see if we could get a little bit wider entrance than the existing access allows for, which is 6 metres wide, and I think in the report you can see a 10 metre wide access at Rumahanga. That still feels pretty narrow to me for a river entrance, but we do have entrances of that scale in some places. Difficult to kind of put a number on it on the spot, having not thought that through. But I would have thought a wider entrance than 6 metres, and probably still recommended that we consider a little bit of extra car parking in that location, on the basis that the car parking at the bend of Ruahine does struggle a little bit sometimes, and we'd have more people living in that vicinity.
So that's essentially what in the paper is presented as option 4, is it?
Yes, that could be scaled a little bit, but yes.
Okay. And then just a question about some of your responses to the submissions, particularly the one about the trees that are currently in the, the mature trees that are currently in the strip. So that's H on page 95. So you've said that most of the existing trees will have to be removed whether the exchange takes place or not, because you think that new adjoining residential owners would have the trees trimmed to the boundary. But, I mean, what is the evidence for that? Is it not also a possibility that someone who buys a section with an overhanging large tree might actually quite like the tree and want to keep it?
Yes, that's a possibility, councillor. Most of the larger specimens of trees there are gums, which are notorious for dropping limbs and leaves. The planners might advise of what a boundary setback would be for a building, but these days they're much shorter than they have in the past, and typically gums would block gutters. If we've got a 2-storey building with block gutters, it's hard to maintain, and there is the risk of dropping limbs. We wouldn't ordinarily these days plant a gum tree that close to boundaries. There had been comment in some of the submissions about maintenance of gum limbs. The other thing is that we assume that they'll build a boundary fence, and the boundary fence would be through the drip line of the gum trees, the root system, presumably excavate a concrete nib at the bottom of the fence. You're correct, I might be wrong. It might be that someone would have an open backyard. Given the density of development proposed, I think that's a low likelihood.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the obligations on the developer, you've said in the paper that because of the amount of green space that's around that new development, that there's no obligations on the developer at all to provide a green space. Is that correct?
That's correct. As part of the reserves assessment for the Roxburgh plan change area, we looked at the existing provision of reserves in that area. The Waterloo Park is in close proximity with sports fields and neighbourhood reserve and a playground. And as per the report, I can't remember in what section the point was made, but I did a measurement. There's roughly 17 hectares of open space within a 500-metre walking distance. You'd be hard-pressed to argue there's many places elsewhere in the city that have that level of green space provision and that walking distance.
So, really, if I'm understanding correctly, the land exchange is more about providing an enhanced access to the river than providing green space for the development. Is that fair?
Yes. So the view I took was that given the location of the strip and what it would look and function like after the housing were built, where it retained there would be a greater benefit to have a enhanced entrance to the river. It's not envisioned to be a play space. It was an amenity space. Similar, I guess, and I've used the example in the report, to the look and feel of Albert Street. In that case, we benefit from the Manawatu Golf Course's green environment on the right-hand side as you look towards the river, and it doesn't feel hemmed in, it feels quite open. If you were to have housing up against the boundary where the Manawatu Golf Course is, potentially to a couple of stories high, would have a different feel. So my view was that if the reserve exchange took place, we would get a better outcome there. Additionally, we will have a better space for planting trees. It'll be a shorter, wider green space, which will allow larger canopy trees versus the long, narrow space as it is at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. A couple of questions for you. Primarily kind of wanting to understand the differences between Figure 1, which, as I understand it, was kind of the original proposal, and Figure 4, which seems to be a modified version of. And just wanted to know some of the rationales there around, for instance, bringing in 2 separate height caps. So as I understand it, Figure 1 was an 11-metre cap, and Figure 4 is now a mix of 9 and 11-metre cap. Why is that?
With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll invite one of the district planners involved in the plan change to respond to that question.
Certainly.
Sorry, Councillor, I'll come back to the first part of your question after.
Tara Leonard, planner. I'm the planner overseeing the Roxburgh Crescent plan change. So the structure plan in figure 1 was an original structure plan we went out for feedback on. This was in the very early days of the plan change, and we put this out to the community to just ask, what do you think of the proposal? And then the structure plan on figure 4 is the latest structure plan we're currently consulting on. So from community feedback and advice from our stormwater engineers, the proposal to the plan change has changed quite a lot. We're looking at a change in lot size from 150 to 250 to cater for on-site stormwater requirements. And then some feedback we had was the feel of the site and the density, that some residents said it didn't feel in character with the wider Hokowhiru area. So we took that into account, and then on further reflection, we looked at the area, and it's not within our proposed medium density plan change. So we looked at altering some of the density, but still providing housing choice. So we provided housing choice by permitting 3-storey along the stop bank, which was the dark grey area, and then keeping the original district plan rules of 9 meters. And yeah, so this is the structure plan that we've got at the moment. So this is the latest, and then the one in figure 1 was the structure plan that was out in the community from November last year.
Great, thank you. And so if I'm seeing that correctly, then it's not only that you have the 11-meter cap goes most of the way along the stop bank, but it doesn't actually continue on to potential sections adjacent to or backing onto Tilbury Ave. Is that read correctly?
Yes, that's correct. Then that's part of our whole transition in character.
Great, thank you. Just on figure 4 as well, if I can understand the key that's there a little bit, it shows one of the key things is a kind of hash mark that says no build area stormwater easement. And I see that hash potentially in 2 places, one on kind of towards the left of it, but then there's also hashing across the reserve exchange proposal area, and just wanted to understand where that hash actually does and doesn't apply in that
apologies,
figure.
Council, that's the hashed green area, if you've printed in colour, is the reserve exchange proposal strip. In hindsight, noting the hash and the key, I should have used a different pattern format to make that distinct. That's not the stormwater no build.
So to clarify, that would become a build area if that exchange goes through?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. Just understanding then around the, you answered Councillor Johnson around no requirement for green space. Is there any obligation on a developer to provide river access?
We have an existing council-owned river access at that point, so that's 6 metres wide across the stop bank there already. It's not been available to the public because it's been within that industrial zone.
And is that little red?
Yeah, that is the
great.
dashed red, very indicatively shown.
And thinking about some of the vehicles that have kind of come and gone from across the stop bank, you see diggers go across occasionally, you see event stages go across occasionally, you see numbers of cars go across when we have the Relay for Life, etc. Is that 6 meter sufficient to cater for the kind of foreseeable needs to bring vehicles into the river environment?
It is. It's been a historical crossing at that point there long ago. If you look at old aerial photographs of the history of the site, Higgins used to quarry and manage the land on the other side of the stop bank as part of the industrial activities, and as over time that's shrunk back inside the stop bank. That crossing there has been used, as you said, for heavy vehicles. It's used for service access, and it's used for large-scale event access on a case-by-case negotiation with Higgins, just about health and safety moving through the yards. So it is sufficient for those servicing purposes, and it is sufficient for a low-scale pedestrian cycle access. If you choose to leave it at that, it will be okay. Or just a decision about whether or not you want to improve the quality or not through the exchange.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you both. That's clarified what we're looking at. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thanks, Aaron. Just on page 93, just that latest structure plan. So I note you've got a small amount of car parking. Obviously that's a bit of a new thing rather than just putting a reserve there. Is that like we didn't do that up at Summerhill, the top of Summerhill with the Tane stairs? We just created an entrance. So this is a little bit different, like providing some amenity. So
And that's correct, councillor. You're right. The Pakia Tane steps. Apologies if I've not named that correctly. We didn't provide some specific car parking. It's just on street at that point. There is small car parks along the river network, and we've referred to the one at the Waterloo Park. There's a little section of car parking at the Rohini Bend. There's a small car park further along Hind Place, just off the road there, about 10 car parks. There are also examples where we've got narrow access ways with no car parking, and Rumahaga Crescent springs to mind, which is shown in the report. We do get some complaints about the lack of car parking at that particular location, for example, and we've had recent proposals to do small-scale developments in Rumahaga Reserve and consulted the community at a low level about some of that, and some of the objections have been about the lack of car parking. So there is a tension, and councillors noted in the previous report the risk about the residential use of those car parks. There is some risk around that as well.
But you've got controls over that, haven't you, with parking enforcement and?
Yes, we would have to put in place some controls if it became a problem.
Time limits or something. I mean, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Tēnā koroa, thank you. Aaron, one of the submissions that we received on the proposed swap was accompanied by a petition with 218 signatures on it, all opposing the swap. And just noted that that opposition has not been mentioned in this report at all, and I was wondering what was your rationale for that?
My apologies, councillor, and that now seems like an appalling oversight. It was covered in the summary of submissions report you previously received, and you consider that some detail at that level, but I should have carried that through to this report, and that's on me.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I think you said it before, or it was Councillor Johnson's question, the $50,000 for connecting a river entrance pathway to the shared pathway, that's going to happen. Well, that's planned to happen regardless of which option we go for.
Yeah, we would be putting a program forward to you that regardless of the options that we think that will need to be connected. I think there'll be a lot of demand from the community for a sealed path connection rather than walking across the grass there.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Thank you to you both. Thank you, Aaron, for presenting this report. There's no further questions. I'm prepared to move the recommendations in the report and look for a seconder, Councillor Naylor, and I'll speak now before moving to other members if they wish to speak. This was quite a full consultative process with the hearing, and I admit there were a range of views that come forward in that, and certainly it was quite a creative hearing with the song ABBA's song Waterloo being played, and I thought it generated a lot of exposure and interest in this issue, which I think is healthy. But on the face of it, considering all aspects, I believe that the setback had an importance when we had an industrial site neighbouring this residential land. And now when it's moving into an urban residential setting, I believe that living arrangements should border up to that existing fence line. In addition to that, I believe the land exchange has the value of widening up the access to the river and the additional car parking facilities, which I think is important for the city-wide viewpoint. The river, we want to face that more. In too many years, we've had our back to the Manawatu River, and since doing the linear pathway and the linear park and putting the Whakakotahi Bridge, are examples of how much use the Manawatu River is being enjoyed by our residents and also our visitors. I think the benefits are enormous, and rather than trying to achieve a both and at a $1.3 million estimate, I believe the value of the land exchange is very sound. I know that will come with a disappointment if this is to pass with the local residents, but as been outlined in this report and through this process, there is immense green space areas around this area for community enjoyment. And so on those key points, that is the position I move these recommendations in. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be opposing the recommendation, and if it fails, I'll signal that I'll look to move option 3 and look for a seconder. I came into this discussion, I guess, thinking that it was a sensible and obvious thing to do to exchange a piece of land that it seemed nobody cared very much about for an enhanced river access way in the new development. However, as part of the process, we did go out for public consultation. And, you know, it's often said of council that public consultation is a tick box exercise, that we do it, but then we just make the decision we were going to make anyway. But in this case, we got, and I think it would be fair to say we were surprised to get, a substantial number of submissions opposing the land exchange and explaining the value of the piece of land to local residents. Now, we didn't get many submissions from other people in the city or other organisations thinking that it would be a good thing to do the land exchange. So when I've come to consider this decision, I've asked myself, as I asked the officer, you know, what would we have done here if there had been no convenient strip of land to offer up as a sacrifice so that we could get a better river access way at no cost to council? And the answer is we would make do with what access was there already, which is the 6-metre access, and possibly try and negotiate to make that slightly wider. We certainly wouldn't have spent 1.3 million on buying a big piece of land to make an enhanced river access way. So, all things considered, I think that we've gone through a process of public consultation. We've asked people what they think. They've told us what they think, and we should be listening to that. And there's plenty of green space around for people in the new development to access. And in fact, there's sufficient green space around that there's no obligation on the developer to provide any anyway. And I think that we should actually listen to those who have raised their voices to say, actually, this piece of land is important to us to retain and not do the land exchange. So on balance, I'm inclined to say that we should not do the land exchange. And if we're not going to do it, I think it would be useful to provide some development to that reserve to make it more effective and useful for a community orchard or community garden, or whatever it is that the community wants to use it for. So that's why I will be voting against this, and as I say, signal option 3 as an alternate.
Thank you. Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Likewise, I will oppose this land swap. I have 3 grounds for that. One is the omission of key evidence, one is a lack of a mandate, and one is reputational risk. So just talking briefly, but at pace to those. This report does tell us that 30 of the 39 submissions that we received are opposed to the land swap, but the true figure is actually closer to 248 people are opposed to this land swap. That has been discussed in the past, and it's key evidence. Its omission from this report is really unfortunate because it actually undermines my confidence in the report in front of me. How often do we attract petitions of that size? with, an accidental omission is actually unacceptable discarding of community views that have been legitimately given during a consultation period where we sought their views. So when considering this decision, I do ask you to keep in mind that the public feedback was actually 1 unsure, 8 in favour, and 248 opposed, potentially even more because one of the submissions listed several addresses, so it said that was the views of several households. Secondly, I just cannot see how we have a community mandate to approve this exchange. I think we have a clear mandate to oppose it. The people who live in this community don't want it. They've expressed an alternative vision for the space if we keep it as it is, and they've backed it up with action, and they're undertaking care and maintenance that we haven't done for years. There's no requirement to provide a reserve in this new development, given the proximity to 17 hectares of River Park and Waterloo Reserve. So in that case, for me, what it comes down to is, do we rob Peter of his reserve now to give it to Paul down the road when he moves in sometime in the future? We asked the community what they thought of that idea, and nearly 250 people said no thanks. So if the message here is that we value good design principles and aesthetics of our river entranceways over the value the existing community place on this space and their desire to develop it as the community grows, then so be it, but I won't vote for that. Thirdly, reputational risk. Of all the ways the community could engage with our decision-making processes, they attended pop-up sessions if they knew about them, they made submissions, they've made public comment and presentations, they've drawn attention in the media, they've lodged a large petition which has disappeared from the piece. Where the reputational risk comes into consideration here is the level of confidence that this community has that this process has been fair and robustly conducted. And I actually consider that, most unfortunately, we have 3 strikes against us, whether perceived or actual. One is the regrettable delay with the letter drop that meant that people weren't informed about our information session until it had already happened. The second is the letter drop that took place last week, which, about the plan change proposals, which due to some graphics and wording was perceived by some to infer that the land swap decision was a fait accompli and decision had already been made, despite us not having talked about it in the chamber. So that's kind of a gut punch, I think, if you're participating in this process in good faith. And the third strike is the omission of the petition from the final deliberations report, which actually effectively silences the bulk of opposition from local residents and treats some people's legitimate input in our processes as if it literally never existed. So how does that look to someone who's engaged in this process? What at all is the point of engaging with us? Just want to remind you, the results of this year's residents' survey, we as elected members and staff scored in the 30% for satisfaction in leadership and trust. 69% of respondents were neutral, dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with their ease and opportunity of engaging in our processes. How would we score this time? I'm a bit embarrassed. I completely understand the planning principles and the rationale for this proposal because it makes really good sense. It's perfectly sensible. But we did ask for the views and they've overwhelmingly said no. We're so absorbed in planning for future residents who aren't even here yet that we're not listening to the people who are already here, our own residents. Finally, on the balance of the arguments, I can't place confidence in the report in front of me because I know it doesn't contain all the information that I need to know to make this decision. I can't claim a mandate from the community to support the swap, and I believe supporting it actually makes us vulnerable to reputational risk of executing a disappearing act on community voice when it overwhelmingly rejected our proposal. Whether that's true or not, the perception, I think, is there for the taking. Most essentially, is having an ideal cohesive design more important than the strong preferences of our existing surrounding community that this piece of land remain intact? And I say no, not this time. If this motion fails, and Councillor Johnson's, I'd move option 2, status quo, and would speak to that if required. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm actually very happy to support the recommendations in the paper for a number of reasons. I just want to also respond to just some of the comments that have been made. I do think that it's really important for us to consult the community on any change, and we've done that. I think, and yes, I think we listen. I think we all sat around the table and listened to the oral submissions and read the written submissions. It's important to note that just because we've consulted and listened, if we make a decision we can consistently make decisions that are what some of our community ask for and are not in line with what some of our community asked for. And I think it's our role to weigh up all of the information, and all of the information that I think is relevant is in this report in front of us. I think we also have to consider the weight of the arguments of both sides, and we need to consider the benefit to the whole city and the cost to the whole city of any decision that we make. I do believe agree with the officer's view that there is significant green space in the area, and I'm really comfortable with the 15 points that officers have responded to in 4.1 about the matters that were raised in the submissions. There have been a response to the submissions made in terms of the thinking of the officers, and that has resulted in some changes. And as we can see, what is proposed has changed a little bit. I won't be supporting, I'll obviously be supporting this, and if it fails, I won't be supporting option 3. If we look at the analysis in the report of the different options, it says that the risks of option 3 is that the path will have poor sight lines and will only add a small amount of value for walking distances for a limited set of properties. And there's also an additional financial cost of that of $161,000. So I do I do want to thank the officers. I know it's always difficult when there is a lot of feedback against a proposal. I do think it's relevant to consider petitions that someone has gone around and got someone else to sign who may or may not have the full understanding of what's proposed. So in terms of the numbers of that, that is part of, I guess, what we need to consider as we look at the options in front of us. But I'm confident with the suggestions in the officer's report here of the changes as a response to those submissions. I'm comfortable with the officer's recommendation on the best way forward for the whole city who will access the path. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to acknowledge the people in the gallery. Thank you for coming in. And I had no set views on this until we really came into this meeting and listening to debate, and also obviously the papers and the officers' evidence. It's very much a heart versus head decision. And I think my colleague theatrically put that across, and well done. But really, there's 91,000 residents in this city. And I appreciate 40 have voiced their opinion, 3-1, saying, no, we don't want this. And to be honest, that's probably what to be expected. The original structure plan or draft plan went out, and I'm happy to say that there has been some modifications. There was the medium density right across the whole site that's been pulled back to the stock bank, and actually a nice setback which allows the Tilbury Ave residents to not have something hard up against their properties. So I think there has been some listening to the consultation. Also the section sizes, they were smaller and they're now larger, and obviously that the whole bulk of the medium density has been pulled right back. So I think it's more in keeping with what is there. But coming back to the heart versus the head, what does the evidence say? What does good planning for the entire city say? It says this is probably a good thing to do. I appreciate it's probably not the answer to those adjoining landowners, and I appreciate you'll probably be unhappy with me and perhaps some other councillors, but we'd have to do this for the entire city. We are elected to represent the entire city. So on that, I appreciate different comments of elected members, but I think wholeheartedly the recommendations put up are the right ones to support. So I do think we should be heading in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things in reply before moving to my main argument. I would absolutely push back on any insinuation that any members of the public were hoodwinked into signing a petition. it's interesting to see it framed as head versus heart. I don't actually see that. I think that actually, when you look at it from a rational point of view and you think about the desire that there is for good access and good connectivity to the river, the only sensible option you can really see in front of you is option 3. And I really appreciate the officers actually bringing us a full range of options here, because when we got through the deliberations report, there was quite some discussion about making sure that we had options to do both things rather than to be stuck in a trade-off scenario. And option 3 very clearly gives us that. We already have the 6-meter entrance from Roxburgh Crescent, perfectly adequate, meets all the access needs, will be just fine for the local residents within that area to access. And with option 3, for something like an extra $80,000, we'll get an entire another river entrance. That's a brilliant result, and that's the result we should be striving for. So I'd urge you to support option 3. I'm more than happy to second Councillor Johnson's recommendation in the case that this shouldn't go ahead as proposed by the chair. I think there's a very strong rationale around option 3 giving us 2 excellent river entrances along this portion of the river. And if we talk about actually turning to face the river and accessing it and embracing it, two access points is certainly far better than one. I think that would actually be a strong reflection of good planning for the entire community, is giving some optionality. I think it's an absolute bargain, $80,000 for an additional river entrance, because we already have the reserve land there. So I'd strongly urge you to vote against option 1, vote for option 3, and we can get 2 entrances for the community. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to climb in on this until the excellent debate I've heard. I just don't believe we have an option. I've heard it said that we've got to do this for the whole city. The whole city didn't climb in on the debate. The whole city didn't put their views forward, but over 200 did. And when we ask this from the community and we get their views and we get it clear, this is their piece of land in the city. And we need to listen to them on what they want in their area. And yeah, no, I'll just leave it at that. I just think we need to start listening to the people that actually make the effort to get involved. I mean, look at the effort. The time people take to actually put in to make us listen, to make us hear, to make sure we do listen and we do hear. Thank you.
Thank you. No further speakers. I'll take my right of reply. I'm very comfortable with moving the recommendations before us. If we were consulting whether we wanted a wider river entranceway or not, I believe we would have got a wider response for this issue. And that's the point that I think is important to keep included in this debate. When we look at the Te Ara Piki Tāne stairs, where there's no parking, I believe that's a real shortfall in the planning process around not having a provision for off-street car parking and that well use, which will only increase usage for that location. Rumahanga was also mentioned with a 10-metre wide, admittedly with a garden down one strip, suggesting that's not ideal at 10 metres. And I tend to concur, when we have an opportunity, wouldn't the city like to enjoy something that's more prominent on this side of the city as far as an entranceway with parking facilities and all the appeal that the river attracts now. As far as the community garden, which is promoted as being its use, it's unfortunate it hasn't been used for that purpose to date until the risk of losing it has been promoted. But I believe if there's a desire for a community garden, already mentioned in earlier comments that there's enormous amount of green space around this community that we could explore, locate another site and have a community garden opportunity for residents. I disagree around this is a sensible decision that's been suggested. We've still got to take in the fact that if we're only limiting ourselves to a 6 metre wide entranceway, I think there's a subsequent decision, if this fails, that we would still want to invest into something that's wider, and if we were going to do both options, a $1.3 million suggested budget provision would be needed from the officer's comments. And I think that's a very real concern, knowing what other financial pressures we have before us. The suggestion that if we were to keep this land, we could end up with 2 river entrances, and that's the aspiration we should be seeking. But when it's so near to the one out of this development is going to provide, and with several others along that stretch of that bend of Riverway, I see that being maybe an outcome that's not necessarily an added benefit, but just one that is a consequence of this decision. So in respect, I'm unchanged in my view. Let's be clear. So if there is a notice of motion in the name of Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Barrett, which would, if this fails, would be put forward, which is option 3 in the report, and the wording associated with that. And recommendation 4 in the paper and before us will need to be put regardless. So that's a standalone recommendation either way we go. So what I intend to do is put 1 to 3 first as before us, and put that to a vote and take business from there. Yep, so we're voting on 1 to 3. That is lost, 5 votes for and 8 against. I'd now like to, which means we're now putting recommendation 3 before the committee, which is to decline the land exchange and develop the existing reserve as an access way community orchard. And therefore invite a vote. Oh, do you want to speak? Yeah, okay. Sorry, the floor is yours. You can speak to that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, colleagues, for the decision that's been made. There are a couple of options left to us at this point, assuming that we're not going to do the land exchange. One is to do nothing with this piece of land, and the other is to develop an access way through it and enable it to be a more useful piece of land for the community. And I just wanted to speak to that because I do think, you know, there have been a few comments about, oh, well, you know, people haven't really done anything with this land until now. Often you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And I do think that the threat of losing this piece of land has made people reassess what they could be using it for. We know that there's been an uplift in the number of community gardens around the city, that there's a big interest now in people growing their own vegetables and fruit. And I think that actually it would be better, rather than just doing status quo, that we do actually try and develop this piece of reserve land so that it is more useful for the local community and to provide a through path. So that's why I would ask that you support option 3. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett, did you wish to speak on seconder?
Thanks, just briefly, and you know, the land very much, as Councillor Johnson said, has suffered from abandonment more than anything else over the years, and I think this is a great chance to see it brought into a great use, both as an access point and as some community garden or orchard space. Had the privilege of walking down there last night and actually seeing, you know, firsthand what had been cleaned up, what had been planted, and while I don't necessarily foresee a future as a wall-to-wall pumpkin patch, I do think that there's, you know, real opportunity in that space to enhance it in a way that makes it incredibly inviting for the public to access the river through there and potentially have some food production as well. So I'd urge you to support this as the best way forward, giving us 2 entrances to this piece of river.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just a question to the mover and seconder. So this sees another 161,000 spent on this to create the pathway. Is that right?
No, I think it, because there's 50,000 already, that's going to be required. So it'll be a net 80,000.
Okay, back to you, Mr Mayor. Can you just queue again, please?
Okay, and the trees obviously will have to come down, I believe. So
there'll be a cost to that.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. Okay, considerable. Thank you.
You'll have a right to reply. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if perhaps it might be useful to get an officer comment, because the report says that option 3 is 161,000, and so if there's 50,000 already, would that additional cost be, are we looking at over 100,000 or?
I think it's an important point. If you're comfortable, we'll invite the officer. Aaron, if you could come forward and answer the question, just so we're clear on the financial implications of option 3.
If you don't mind, I'll just gather my thoughts for a moment, Mr Chair.
That's fine.
Just the math.
Councillors, you could apply a range here in terms of the budgets. The cost was 161,000 if we were to purchase an access way to the existing strip from the new roading development that would be within Roxburgh. The width could vary. We could buy 5 metres. We could match the existing width of the strip, which is 11 metres, which would double the cost of 5 metres. Typically, I would probably suggest matching the existing width. I think it would probably feel a lot more contiguous if it was 11 metres wide to connect. I'd have to come back to you with exactly what that might cost. We could also have a simple crushed gravel path, or we could go to a full concrete path, depending on the level of service that you want to deliver. And that may involve some conversation with the community representatives who have suggested alternatives to concrete and some other written communication of late. So it might be worth checking with them what they want or what they think is adequate. So I'm a little bit hesitant to put a firm number in. The report does say 161, but it does depend on your appetite for a spend there, and we can modify that to suit how much you think. So 161 is probably at the upper end. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. We can move forward knowing that it's the upper end and there might be some levels of service adjustments accordingly.
Thank you. I just thought it was important to have that clarified, just to have good information in front of us. I won't be supporting option 3. The report says that under the option 3 analysis on page 105, that the access would be of poor quality, being long and narrow, and make only a minor difference to the walking distance to a limited number of destinations for a limited number of people. I think when we consider the benefit of the whole city in accessing the river, I don't believe this is the best option, so I won't be supporting it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Chair. Look, I've just got a question perhaps for officers, just in terms of, by putting a pathway through this, does that have any effect in terms of the reserve status? Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I intend to support this. It was my intention to move option 2 on the basis that the status quo is the most affordable option. The costs that would be incurred with that would be incurred regardless of which option, and it would leave the community to organically respond and develop this area as and when, or with either sorts of funding they saw appropriate. However, I'm really happy to support this option because it means we improve the accessibility of that for the community, and what I have in mind with this is the massive intensification that's about to happen on both sides of this reserve with the Roxburgh plan change, but also with the Kaingaora development that's happening on the other side of Tilbury. That population in this area is just about to explode over the next few years. So having accessibility through that area I think is really important, and I think that is a good outcome with the future in mind. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to add, which is a reflection from our CFO around that there'll be a need to come forward with some financials that will gauge our level of support for the level of service treatments around that. So if we could still use the 161 as a guide, like it's been responded as an upper limit, I think that's how we can make best decision making for now. I won't be supporting this recommendation due to my arguments in the prior debate. I think this would be an unfortunate outcome for the access to the river, even though it's creating a secondary access. Ultimately, I think it leaves the one within the new development as a poorer outcome. Councillor Johnson, I'll call on you. You have the opportunity to write a reply.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I did signal that this was an alternate when I spoke first, and I guess it would be good if elected members could just think about the effect of the previous vote, which shows that the majority of elected members didn't support the land exchange. And that being established, it's then really a question about what is the best option from there. So to rehash the arguments that have just been voted on, I don't think is helpful. I do believe that it's worth some investment of money into developing this area. We've done nothing with it for many a long year, and I think it's the very least that the residents could hope for, to have this as an enhanced space. I also think it will provide benefit and amenity for those who will be coming to live in the adjacent development. So to me, this seemed a better option than just status quo. And so that's why I put this one forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'd now like to invite a vote for option 3. That is supported and passed, 10 votes for, 2 against and 1 abstention. That to complete this paper, we'll need to have a vote on recommendation 4. That council note that regardless of the decisions on the exchange of budget for additional car parking and path connection, connecting the new river entranceway to the existing Manawatu River Shed path has been forwarded to the draft plan 2434 10-year plan, and invite a vote. That is passed unanimously, 12 votes for. You can We'll be carrying on with business, but if this would be a natural pause for you if you wish to depart, but otherwise you're more than welcome to continue on and listen to the balance of our next item. Thank you. That will move us into item 11 again. And I'll move the recommendations from the 2023 Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment, seconded by Deputy Chair Councillor Naylor. So this is item 11, page 119. Questions have been exhausted. I would now like to move us into comment and debate and open the queue. So this is item 11, Natalia. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, just regathering my thoughts, but look, I'm happy with the balance of what the officers have provided, and greenfields versus brownfields, but really it's around influencing the influencers or the developers, and that's where we are having some issues, and influences such as city partners. It's the challenge really is getting this land to market. If you went out today to look for a section, there's not a lot on offer in the city, and it's not actually reflective in these numbers. So although we can put up all these numbers, there's it's incredibly hard to get a section and build in the city. And it's not a dig at the officers or it's just we've got some things out of kilter. Sections are slow to come to the market. You know, I realise that our regional colleagues are coming to grips around the future development themselves, and there's a number of us that are working through that at the moment. And I suppose it's the other levers we have, the district plan, and LTP program lines. We've traditionally done infrastructure just in time in the city, and I think it's starting to catch up with us. So as we enter some pretty challenging financial times, I can only see that getting worse. So I do signal that we've got to have a little bit of a change in thinking and how we're doing this. Yes, we can rezone land, but how do we get it to the market? The city is relatively confined, so we don't build on high-class soils. We're one of the few, including our neighbours. They all do. We don't. So, you know, other cities are doing this better, and I just wonder if there is some ways of learning from the Upper Huts, the Rotoruas, the Hawke's Bays and Taranakis. What are they doing differently that's enabling development to happen and getting that infrastructure in place quicker? We are still very, very affordable. We're more affordable than all of those places I just mentioned. So we do have some tools that we should be using. But look, thanks for the report. I think it's great, but the real challenge is, and any commercial real estate agent or any developer will tell you, we're not getting things to the market. So that is the challenge, and we may need some tweaks to some of our levers, our FDS, but also our district plan, because it is quite permissive as well, and we just need to understand we've got a couple of negatives there to get hopefully a positive outcome eventually. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting read, a very hefty document, but it was useful to just go and understand the process, and particularly the officers' questions, the answers to questions today were really helpful. I think, you know, this is clearly an assessment on our current position, and that's from looking at data behind us and currently. I'm actually really interested in us having further conversations when it comes to the future development strategy on discussing the levers we can pull, actually make a difference to the picture going forward. I think, you know, just looking at the assessment alone will only, and if we just carry on with the same as what we've always been doing, will only get the same result as what we've seen so far. In particular, I'd like to see us look at how we could increase the infill and in particular make the process for infill more straightforward. Clearly, we need to still provide some greenfield, but I mean, recent reports to council have shown the huge cost of greenfield, and if we can slow the need for that, I think that's a really worthwhile consideration, not just financially, but also on lifestyle and environmental factors of what that means for our city. And I think that would align with some of our broader strategy as well. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. I understand that's part of the LTP discussion, but for now, this has been a useful summary to show us where our current position is.
Thank you. Councillor Zebulon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think I echo both of those pretty much. I think the Mayor talked about the big challenge. I still feel that the biggest challenge is how this is all getting paid for, particularly the infrastructure to support that development capacity. And I feel that this report is really divorced from that reality. I think it has a lot of, also, firstly, just have to say I liked reading this report. I went down a lot of deep dives in it, and as a researcher and analyst, I love a research report. So I've spent a lot of time with it, and the overwhelming question that I still have is that it's filled with assumptions that what needs to happen will happen, and that involves a massive intergenerational debt, astronomical. Like, as Councillor Naylor said, we've heard that already for a paltry, the $70 million to put the infrastructure in place. Also, I didn't see necessarily that we'd taken stock of the current state of our infrastructure and what capacity that we're at to indicate what level of infrastructure will be required to service the infill. The map of the infill that's projected really shows our permeable surfaces in our city disappearing. So if my famous stormwater lens is on, that's a massive concern to me, not only about how we're going to pay for the upgrade of infrastructure to support this development, but where's that water going to go when we've used up that permeable space? So I think those are bigger challenges again than matching people up with housing, is actually how are we going to afford to pay for the infrastructure upgrades to service this, and there's no mention of that really in this capacity assessment. So I feel it's a silo that's missing quite a big picture of how we deliver this vision. That's a bigger challenge again, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and would echo the appreciation to staff that have obviously done a lot of work to build a research and analysis here that gives us a clear outlook on, where things are going unless things change. And I think there's some really clear and useful signals in here about where things might be going. And it behooves us to take those on board and think about it. And particularly, I do find concerning a signal that there would be an increasing reliance over time on greenfield development as a proportion of that development capacity. I think that has significant headwinds in front of it in terms of affordability, in terms of city vibrancy, in terms of sustainability, in terms of actual infrastructure delivery, and then actually maintenance of that infrastructure over time. And I think we need to be asking ourselves some pretty hard questions about whether that is actually our optimal future. It's useful to see this report and for it to give us a signal, but I think we do need to be prepared to respond accordingly. And for me, that includes ensuring that the infill that we do is not just building in, but is building up. The future form of the city would be much better if it were closer to a cupcake than a pancake.
Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you. I really thought this report was great. I thought Tara and Sam did a great job. I thought they did a great job in answering our questions as well, because we had a lot of questions. So thank you very much. To Councillor Zebulon's point, I think where you're coming from is that discussion is then into our long-term plan. So those discussion points is what we will debate in the long-term plan. Where we got this is our needs assessment now, but the long-term plan is where we discuss where we're going to and where we're going to be able to put our budgets going forward. So that's where we have to make those hard decisions going forward. But this is a great discussion point for our assessment, and the long-term plan is where we have to make those hard decisions on what we're going to do for growth for the city and where we're going to put our money for growth for the city. But this is a really good platform to know what we have to do for the next 30 years, and the long-term plan is going to be what we're going to make the decisions on where we're going to put our money where our mouth is. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There's no further speakers wishing to make comments, so I'll now invite a vote. I moved them. They were seconded by Councillor Naylor. For the record. Oh, let's repeat. Yeah. Now invite a vote. This will be the official vote. That is passed unanimously, 12 votes for. Councillors, we will now break for lunch, and can I remind those attending the training hui to join in the length span, and we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you.